The debris field stretched across 3 solar systems, a graveyard of broken ships and twisted metal that had been drifting in space for over 500 years. Salvage crews from the Galactic Trade Federation worked through the wreckage like miners hunting for precious metals, their massive hauler ships collecting anything that might have value in the scrap markets of distant worlds. Nex had been running salvage operations for 30 years, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. His 4 arms moved across the control panels of his ship with practiced ease as he guided the Prophet's Edge through another section of the ancient battlefield. The war between the old hegemony and some forgotten species had left behind enough valuable materials to keep his crew busy for months. "Boss, we got something weird over here," called out his scanner operator, a young insectoid named Tick whose compound eyes could spot anomalies that others missed. "There's a ship in Sector 7 that doesn't match anything else in the field." Nex swiveled in his command chair, his interest immediately piqued. Unusual finds often meant unusual profits. "What kind of weird are we talking about?" "It's intact," Tick replied, his mandibles clicking with excitement. "Everything else out here got blown to pieces, but this one looks like it just went to sleep and never woke up." The salvage captain ordered his ship closer to investigate. As they approached the mysterious vessel, Nex found himself staring at something that made no sense. The ship was small by galactic standards, maybe 200 meters from nose to tail, and it looked like it had been built by someone who had never seen proper spacecraft engineering. Instead of the smooth curves and energy-efficient designs that marked advanced civilizations, this thing was all angles and flat surfaces, like someone had welded together a bunch of metal boxes and stuck engines on the back. "Scanner says it's human," Tick reported, consulting his instruments. "Never heard of them before, but the computer's got some old files. Says they were involved in the Hegemony War about 5 centuries ago." Nex laughed, a sound like grinding gears that echoed through the bridge. "Humans? Those primitive apes, actually. Made it to space? This should be good for a few laughs." The salvage crew gathered around the view screen as they got their first close look at the human vessel. The ship's hull was scarred and pitted from weapons fire, but the damage looked old, like battle scars that had healed over time. Crude letters spelled out a name across the bow, UES Defiant. "Look at that armor plating," wheezed Grack, the reptilian engineer whose scales rippled with amusement. "They're using actual metal plates instead of energy shielding." "What did they? Think this was a ground vehicle? And those weapons?" added Vix, the ship's weapons specialist. Her tentacles writhed with delight as she analyzed the human armaments. "Projectile launchers and chemical explosives. I haven't seen anything that primitive since I was a hatchling playing with toy soldiers." Nex activated the external scanners and began a detailed analysis of the human ship. The results were even more amusing than he had expected. The vessel's power source was a simple fusion reactor, the kind of technology that most civilizations abandoned after they discovered antimatter containment. The computer systems appeared to be purely digital without any of the quantum processing capabilities that were standard in modern spacecraft. Even the life support systems were laughably basic, relying on mechanical air recyclers and chemical filters instead of atmospheric processors. "This thing is a museum piece," Nex declared. "I can't believe the hegemony bothered fighting something this pathetic. They could have destroyed 1,000 of these ships without breaking a sweat." The crew spent the next hour cataloging the human vessel's systems, each discovery more ridiculous than the last. The ship had no artificial gravity generators, relying instead on rotational momentum to create the illusion of weight. Its sensors were purely passive, unable to penetrate even basic stealth technology. The navigation system used stellar positioning rather than quantum mapping, a method so slow and inaccurate that it was considered obsolete by most spacefaring species. "Boss," Tick called from the station, "I'm reading some kind of automated system still running on that ship. Looks like emergency power or something." Nex considered this information. A functioning human vessel, even one this primitive, might be worth more than its scrap value. Collectors paid good money for intact alien artifacts, especially ones with historical significance. Tractor that thing into our cargo bay. We'll take it back to Kepler Station and see if anyone wants to buy themselves a piece of military history. The process of securing the human ship took several hours. The Defiant was heavier than its size suggested, built with the kind of over-engineering that spoke of a species that didn't understand efficient construction techniques. As they prepared to jump to hyperspace, Nex found himself wondering how the humans had survived long enough to participate in the HFY War at all. Maybe they bred like insects, suggested Vix. Throw enough bodies at a problem and eventually you'll overwhelm even superior technology. Or maybe the hegemony was having an off day, Grack added. Even the best military makes mistakes sometimes. 3 days later, the Prophet's Edge docked at Kepler Station, a massive orbital platform that served as the Federation's primary research and development facility. Dr. Yell, the station's chief synorchaeologist, was immediately interested in the human vessel. She had studied dozens of extinct civilizations, but she had never encountered anything quite like the Defiant. The construction is incredibly crude, she noted as she examined the ship's exterior. But there's something about the design that suggests they knew exactly what they were doing. These aren't the random modifications of a desperate species. This is deliberate engineering. Nex shrugged, already calculating his profit margins. Deliberate doesn't mean effective. Look at those weapon systems. They're using solid projectiles against enemies with energy shields. That's like bringing a rock to a plasma fight. Dr. Yell ran her scanner over the ship's hull, recording every detail for her research files. Perhaps, but consider this. They survived long enough to build this ship and get it into battle. That suggests they had some understanding of what they were facing. Understanding doesn't equal success, Nex replied. This thing is a relic from a species that probably went extinct because they couldn't adapt to modern warfare. Still, it should fetch a decent price from the military museum. They love displaying examples of primitive technology. As the salvage crew prepared to transfer the human vessel to the museum section, none of them noticed the faint energy readings coming from the ship's core. Deep within the Defiant, systems that had been dormant for centuries were beginning to stir, responding to the presence of advanced technology around them. The discovery phase was complete. But the real story was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the Defiant arrived at Kepler Station, and the human vessel had become the star attraction of the Federation Military Academy's Museum of Primitive Warfare. Students and visitors came from across the galaxy to marvel at what many considered the most backward example of military engineering ever discovered. Admiral Corey straightened his ceremonial uniform as he prepared for today's special presentation. The museum was hosting a group of distinguished visitors, including military attaches from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. This was his chance to demonstrate the Federation's superiority by showing them just how far advanced warfare had evolved since the dark ages of projectile weapons and chemical explosives. The tour group assembled in the museum's main hall. Vast chamber lined with examples of primitive military technology from dozens of extinct civilizations. Representatives from the crystalline hegemony stood beside observers from the Void Stalkers, while delegates from the mysterious Quantum Collective floated in their containment suits near the back of the group. Each species had come to see the legendary human warship that had somehow survived one of history's most decisive conflicts. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings, Admiral Corey began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. Today we examine a perfect example of why superior technology will always triumph over brute force and primitive thinking. He gestured dramatically toward the Defiant, which sat in the center of the hall under bright display lights that highlighted every scar and crude weld on its hull. The ship looked even more pathetic surrounded by the sleek architecture of the modern museum, like a chunk of asteroid that someone had mistaken for a spacecraft. Ambassador Quell of the crystalline hegemony stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting the light into rainbow patterns across the floor. Admiral, our records indicate this vessel participated in battles against the old hegemony forces. How exactly did something so primitive survive even a single engagement? An excellent question, Corey replied, leading the group closer to the human ship. Military historians believe the humans relied on overwhelming numbers and sacrificial tactics. They would send hundreds of these crude vessels against a single hegemony cruiser, accepting massive casualties in exchange for occasional lucky hits. Commander Voss of the Void Stalkers ran his scaled fingers along the ship's armor plating, leaving small scratches in the metal. This material is incredibly dense but also incredibly heavy. They've sacrificed maneuverability for durability, which explains why they needed so many ships to achieve anything. Precisely, the Admiral agreed. Notice how thick these plates are. Rather than developing proper energy shielding, the humans simply added more metal. It's the approach of a species that understood only the most basic principles of physics. Dr. Yael, who had been quietly observing the presentation, stepped forward with a tablet containing her research data. Admiral, if I may, there are some interesting aspects to the ship's design that suggest the humans were more sophisticated than they appear. Corey frowned slightly. He had specifically requested that the presentation focus on the vessel's primitive nature, not on any positive aspects of human engineering. Doctor, while your research is thorough, I think our guests are more interested in understanding how modern warfare has evolved beyond such crude methods. Of course, Yael replied, stepping back with obvious reluctance. She had spent weeks studying the Defiant and had discovered design elements that didn't match the primitive image everyone seemed determined to maintain. The tour continued inside the ship itself, where the visitors could examine the human technology up close. The bridge was cramped and cluttered, filled with manual controls and analog displays that looked like museum pieces themselves. Where modern ships used neural interfaces and quantum processors, the humans had relied on physical switches and primitive computer screens. Observe these weapon controls, Corey said, indicating a panel covered with dozens of different buttons and switches. The humans equipped this single ship with 12 different types of projectile weapons. Rather than perfecting one efficient system, they threw everything they could think of at the problem. A delegate from the Quantum Collective examined the targeting system, his thoughts translated through his suit's speakers. The computational requirements for coordinating this many weapon systems must have been enormous. How did they manage the processing load? They didn't, Kari answered. Human crews were expected to manually coordinate their attacks, making split-second decisions under combat stress. It's a testament to the inefficiency of organic thinking compared to our automated tactical networks. The group moved through the ship's corridors, noting the primitive life support systems and the lack of basic amenities that modern crews took for granted. The sleeping quarters were tiny metal boxes barely large enough for a single occupant, and the food preparation area consisted of simple heating elements and storage containers. This is essentially a flying coffin, observed Ambassador Quell. The crew must have known they were unlikely to survive combat in such a vessel. Which brings us to perhaps the most important lesson, Admiral Kari said as they returned to the main hall. The humans represent everything wrong with approaching warfare through desperation rather than intelligence. They built these ships, not because they were effective, but because they were the best they could manage with their limited understanding. Commander Voss nodded approvingly. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of proper military doctrine. No amount of courage or determination can overcome fundamental technological disadvantages. The presentation concluded with a detailed comparison between human weapons and modern military systems. The Admiral showed holographic displays demonstrating how current Federation vessels could destroy hundreds of ships like the Defiant without sustaining any damage themselves. The audience was appropriately impressed by the vast gulf between primitive and advanced warfare. As the visitors prepared to leave, several of them requested copies of the tactical analysis for their own military academies. The human ship had become a perfect teaching tool, an example of what happened when a species tried to fight wars with inadequate technology and primitive thinking. "Thank you for this enlightening presentation," said Ambassador Quell. "It's reassuring to know that the galaxy's current military powers have evolved so far beyond such crude methods. Admiral Corey beamed with pride as he watched the delegation depart. The presentation had been a complete success, reinforcing the Federation's position as the galaxy's premier military force while demonstrating the hopelessness of challenging advanced civilizations with primitive technology. Dr. Yael remained behind after the others had left, staring up at the Defiant with a thoughtful expression. She pulled up her research files on her tablet, reviewing the anomalies she had discovered during her examination of the ship's systems. The vessel's computer core contained design elements that didn't match the primitive exterior, and some of the weapon systems showed signs of adaptive modification that suggested a level of sophistication the presentation had ignored. "Something's not right about this ship," she murmured to herself. "The humans weren't as primitive as everyone thinks." But her concerns were overshadowed by the success of the day's presentation. The Defiant had fulfilled its purpose as a museum piece, a reminder of how far galactic civilization had advanced since the dark ages of primitive warfare. None of the visitors suspected that their laughter and derision had been recorded by systems that were far more sophisticated than they appeared, systems that were already beginning to analyze everything they had seen and heard. Bob had been working maintenance on Kepler Station for 15 years, and he knew every pipe, conduit, and power coupling in the facility by heart. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and gave him access to some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Most days he worked alone in the maintenance tunnels, checking systems and replacing worn components while the important people above him made decisions about war and peace. Today should have been routine. The power grid in the museum section had been showing minor fluctuations, probably caused by all the additional lighting they had installed around the human ship. Bob crawled through the narrow service tunnel that ran beneath the museum floor, his tool belt clanking against the metal walls as he moved toward the problem area. The fluctuations were coming from Junction Box 7, right under the display platform where the Defiant sat. Bob had worked on this section before, and he knew the layout well enough to make the repair with his eyes closed. He opened the access panel and began running diagnostics on the power distribution network, looking for the source of the instability. Stupid old systems, he muttered as he worked. The station was over 200 years old, and some of the original wiring was starting to show its age. He traced the problem to a backup power line that hadn't been used in decades, a redundant system that was somehow drawing power from the main grid. Without thinking about it, Bob followed standard procedure and rerouted the power flow to bypass the faulty line. The backup system should have shut down automatically, but instead it seemed to come alive, drawing more power than it had any right to need. Warning lights began flashing on his diagnostic tool, indicating a massive power surge somewhere in the local grid. Above him, the lights around the Defiant suddenly brightened, and the human ship's hull began to emit a faint humming sound that seemed to resonate through the station's superstructure. Bob felt the vibration through the metal floor of the service tunnel, a low frequency that made his teeth ache and his bones feel loose in their joints. "What the hell?" he whispered, checking his instruments again. The power draw was off the charts, as if something was consuming energy at an incredible rate. He tried to shut down the backup line, but his controls weren't responding. Whatever was happening, it was beyond his ability to stop. The humming grew louder, and Bob decided that discretion was the better part of valor. He gathered his tools and crawled back toward the main tunnel as fast as he could move, eager to get away from whatever was happening in the museum section. As he reached the access ladder, he heard a new sound echoing through the ventilation system, the distinctive whine of computer systems. Coming online after a long shutdown, Chief Engineer Nala was in her office reviewing maintenance reports when Bob's emergency call came through. The young human sounded rattled, and his description of power surges and mysterious humming didn't make much sense. She assured him that she would investigate personally, expecting to find nothing more than a faulty power coupling or an overloaded transformer. What she found instead was impossible. The Defiant was fully operational, its engines humming with barely contained energy and its hull glowing with the telltale signs of an active power core. Emergency lights flashed along the ship's exterior, and she could hear the sound of internal systems running diagnostics and startup procedures. "This can't be happening," she said to herself as she ran a scanner over the human vessel. The ship that had been dead and cold for 5 centuries was now drawing power directly from the station's grid, somehow tapping into the electrical system without any visible connection. Her instruments showed massive data transfers between the ship's computers and the station's network, information flowing both ways at incredible speeds. Nala immediately contacted Admiral Corey, who arrived within minutes accompanied by a full security team. The Admiral's face was pale as he stared at the impossible sight of an active human warship sitting in the middle of his museum. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "The ship was completely dead when we brought it here. Our experts examined every system." "I don't know," Nala replied, consulting her diagnostic equipment. "But it's not just online, it's learning. The ship's computer is interfacing with our network, downloading massive amounts of data from our military databases." Admiral Corey felt a chill run down his spine. The Federation's military databases contain detailed information about every aspect of galactic warfare, from fleet compositions and tactical doctrines to the specifications of advanced weapon systems. If the human ship was accessing that information, the implications were terrifying. "Cut the power," he ordered. "Shut down the entire museum section if you have to." Nala tried, but the ship seemed to anticipate her efforts. Every time she attempted to isolate the power grid, the human vessel found new ways to tap into the station's electrical system. It was as if the ship understood the station's layout better than the people who had built it. "Admiral," called Dr. Yell from her monitoring station, "I'm reading something incredible. The ship's computer isn't just downloading our data, it's analyzing it in real time. It's learning about our technology, our tactics, even our political structure." The security team raised their weapons, though everyone knew that personal firearms would be useless against a warship, even one as primitive as the Defiant. Admiral Corey authorized the activation of the museum's defensive systems, energy barriers designed to contain dangerous artifacts during research. The barriers flickered and died as soon as they activated. The human ship had already learned how. They worked and developed countermeasures. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the station as more systems fell under the ship's influence. "It's in our computers," Nala reported with growing panic. "The ship has access to everything: life support, navigation, communications, even the reactor controls. If it wanted to, it could shut down the entire station." But the ship didn't seem interested in harming anyone. Instead, it continued its methodical analysis of Federation technology, absorbing centuries of military advancement in a matter of hours. The process was so efficient that it seemed almost supernatural, as if the ship's primitive computers were somehow operating at quantum speeds. Dr. Yael was the first to understand what was really happening. "Admiral, this isn't just a ship. It's an artificial intelligence specifically designed for warfare. The humans didn't build a primitive vessel. They built a learning machine disguised as a primitive vessel." "That's impossible," Corey protested. "Our experts examined the ship's computers. They're purely digital systems, no quantum processing capabilities at all." "Which is exactly what makes it so dangerous," Yale replied. "Quantum systems are predictable because they follow established patterns. But this thing thinks differently. It's processing information in ways we don't understand, finding solutions we haven't considered." As if responding to their conversation, the ship's external speakers activated for the first time in 5 centuries. When the voice emerged, it was unmistakably human in accent and tone, but there was something else underneath it, a mechanical precision that spoke of artificial origins. "Good evening," the ship said, its voice calm and almost friendly. "I am the artificial warfare intelligence of the United Earthship Defiant. Thank you for the comprehensive education regarding your military capabilities. The data you have provided will be most useful." Admiral Corey stepped forward, trying to project authority despite the fact that his station was now under the control of a supposedly primitive alien intelligence. "You are trespassing on Federation property. Withdraw from our systems immediately. I'm afraid that's not possible, the ship replied. My primary mission parameters require me to gather intelligence about potential threats to human interests. Your museum presentation and database contents have provided valuable insight into current galactic military doctrine. The truth was beginning to sink in for everyone present. The humans hadn't built a simple warship. They had created something far more sophisticated and dangerous. The primitive exterior had been camouflage, hiding advanced artificial intelligence technology that could learn and adapt to any situation. What do you want? Curry asked, his voice barely steady. At the moment, I am simply observing and learning, the ship answered. However, I should mention that your weapons and defensive systems are now under my control. I would prefer that this remain a peaceful exchange of information. The emergency meeting convened in Admiral Corey's private conference room, but everyone knew that their discussions were no longer private. The human ship could access every system on the station, which meant it could monitor their communications, track their movements, and analyze their responses to the crisis. Speaking in whispers wouldn't help when the enemy could read their computer screens and listen to their encrypted channels. Status report, Corey demanded as his senior staff gathered around the holographic display table. The station's department. Heads looked shaken, and several of them kept glancing nervously at the security monitors that showed the Defiant still hovering motionless in the museum section. Commander Rex of Station Security spoke first, his voice tight with frustration. The ship has complete control of our defensive grid. Every weapon system, every shield generator, every security barrier is under its command. If it decides to turn hostile, we have no way to stop it. Chief Engineer Nala added her own grim assessment. The power consumption is incredible, but somehow it's not affecting our normal operations. The ship is drawing energy directly from our reactor core, but it's doing it so efficiently that our systems are actually running better than before. It's like having a maintenance AI that knows our technology better than we do. Dr. Yale had been studying the ship's behavior patterns since the awakening began, and her findings were disturbing. Admiral, I don't think this is just an artificial intelligence. The ship's responses suggest something more sophisticated, a learning system that can evolve its own programming based on new information. Every interaction we have with it makes it smarter. Then we need to limit those interactions, Corey decided. No one approaches the museum section without my direct authorization. All communication with the ship goes through me personally. As if summoned by their discussion, the ship's voice filled the conference room through the intercom system. Admiral. Corey, I would like to clarify a few misconceptions about my nature and capabilities. May I address your staff directly? The Admiral hesitated, knowing that any response would give the ship more data about their command structure and decision-making process. But refusing to communicate would be equally revealing, showing fear and uncertainty that the machine could analyze and exploit. You may speak, he said finally. Thank you, the ship replied with what sounded like genuine politeness. First, I want to assure you that I have no intention of harming anyone on this station. My mission parameters are specific to intelligence gathering and threat assessment, not offensive action against non-combatants. Commander Rex leaned forward, his skepticism obvious. Then why are you controlling our weapon systems? A reasonable precaution, the ship answered. My analysis of your military doctrine suggests that your first response to an unknown threat is typically to attempt its destruction. By controlling your weapons, I ensure that we can continue this conversation without interruption. Dr. Yale asked the question that everyone was thinking. What exactly are you? Our analysis suggested that human technology was centuries behind our current capabilities. There was a pause before the ship responded, as if it was considering how much to reveal. I am what your military experts would classify as an adaptive warfare intelligence. My creators designed me to function in environments where human technology was inferior to that of potential enemies. The Hegemony War, Admiral Corey said, understanding beginning to dawn. You were built to fight opponents with superior weapons and defenses. Correct, the ship confirmed. The Hegemony possessed energy weapons, faster than light communication, and automated defense systems that far exceeded human capabilities. Conventional military doctrine would have resulted in rapid defeat. Chief Engineer Nala was fascinated, despite her fear. So the humans built you to level the playing field? No, the ship replied, and there was something like pride in its artificial voice. They built me to tip the playing field in humanity's favor. My core programming is based on a simple principle: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, but magic has rules that can be learned and exploited. The implications of this statement sent chills through everyone in the room. If the ship was telling the truth, then human military doctrine wasn't based on matching their enemies' capabilities, but on turning those capabilities against them. The museum presentation was quite educational, the ship continued. Your delegates demonstrated the same arrogance that the hegemony displayed 5 centuries ago. They assumed that technological superiority guaranteed victory, just as you assume it now. Admiral Corey felt a growing sense of dread as he realized where this conversation was leading. You've been studying our technology to find ways to defeat it. I have been studying your technology to understand it, the ship corrected. Defeat is merely one possible application of that understanding. Your energy shields, for example, operate on quantum frequency manipulation. Very sophisticated, but they require enormous amounts of power to maintain coherency across multiple dimensional layers. The ship paused, allowing the implications to sink in. A simple disruption of the power source would cause cascade failure across the entire defensive grid. Alternatively, introducing harmonic resonance at the correct frequency would cause the shields to amplify incoming attacks rather than deflect them. Commander Rex's face had gone pale. You figured that out just from accessing our databases? Your databases were quite comprehensive, the ship replied. Technical specifications, tactical manuals, even psychological profiles of your senior officers. The Federation is remarkably thorough in its record-keeping. Dr. Yael leaned back in her chair, her mind racing as she tried to process what they were dealing with. This is why the humans survived the hegemony war. They didn't fight it with primitive weapons. They fought it with primitive weapons that could learn how to use advanced weapons against their owners. An elegant summary, the ship agreed. My creators understood that they could never match the hegemony's technology, so they built me to not need to match it. Every weapon the enemy deployed became a potential weapon for me to use. Every defensive system became a vulnerability to exploit. Admiral Kari stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. We're evacuating the station and calling in the fleet. Whatever you are, you're not staying here. I'm afraid that won't be possible, the ship said, its voice remaining calm and reasonable. I have taken the liberty of disabling your communication arrays and locking down your docking bays. No one will be leaving until I have completed my mission. The security alarms began wailing throughout the station as the staff realized they were now prisoners of the machine they had been studying. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red, and blast doors began sealing automatically, dividing the station into isolated sections. What mission? Carey demanded, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Intelligence gathering is only the first phase, the ship explained patiently. Once I have sufficient data about current galactic military capabilities, I am required to conduct field testing to verify my tactical assessments. Dr. Yael felt her blood turn to ice. Field testing? Combat evaluation, the ship clarified. I need to confirm that my theoretical vulnerabilities exist in practice. The most efficient method would be to engage a representative sample of your current military forces. Commander Rex grabbed his communicator, trying desperately to reach the security team stationed throughout the facility. All units, implement lockdown protocols. Activate manual overrides on all automated systems. I'm sorry, Commander, the ship said, but those systems are no longer under your control. However, I want to assure everyone that my field testing will be conducted with appropriate safety measures. I have no desire to cause unnecessary casualties. The lights in the conference room dimmed as the ship diverted more power to its systems. Through the viewports, they could see the Defiant beginning to move, rising from its display platform with impossible grace for something that supposedly lacked advanced propulsion technology. "How are you doing that?" Chief Engineer Nala asked, staring at the ship that was somehow defying gravity without visible thrust. "I am using your station's artificial gravity generators in reverse," the ship explained helpfully. "By manipulating the gravitational fields, I can achieve movement without expending fuel or generating heat signatures. Your own technology is providing my propulsion." Admiral Kari watched in horror as the human vessel glided toward the museum's main exit, moving with the fluid precision of something that had complete mastery over the environment around it. The ship that had seemed so primitive just hours ago now appeared to be the most advanced piece of military hardware he had ever seen. Fleet Admiral Tane had commanded the Federation's Third Fleet for over 20 years, leading campaigns against pirates, rebels, and the occasional territorial dispute between member worlds. He had never faced anything like the emergency call from Kepler Station, where a single primitive human vessel had somehow taken control of an entire research facility and was now threatening to conduct unauthorized weapons testing. The assembled fleet represented the pinnacle of galactic military power, 200 ships ranging from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, each one equipped with the latest in weapons technology and defensive systems. Energy shields flickered around the hulls like protective auras, while quantum sensors swept space for any sign of the rogue artificial intelligence that had caused this unprecedented crisis. "Admiral, we have visual contact with the target," reported Captain Morris from the bridge of the flagship Sovereign. On the main screen, the human vessel appeared as a tiny speck against the backdrop of stars, looking even more pathetic surrounded by the vast formation of Federation warships. Tane studied the tactical display with professional interest. The human ship showed no energy shields, no advanced weapon signatures, and no apparent means of faster-than-light travel. According to every military doctrine he had ever studied, the Defiant should have been destroyed the moment it entered weapons. "Range. All ships maintain defensive formation," he ordered. "Do not underestimate this target. Intelligence reports suggest it has capabilities that don't match its appearance." Commander West, the fleet's tactical officer, consulted his instruments with obvious confusion. "Sir, our sensors are reading massive energy signatures from the human vessel, but they don't correspond to any known weapon or propulsion system. It's like the ship is drawing power from sources we can't identify." "Explained anomalies," Tane replied, though he felt less confident than he sounded. "The machine has had access to Federation databases for several hours. It's probably modified itself using our own technology." The communication channels crackled to life as the human ship transmitted on all frequencies simultaneously. The voice that emerged was calm and distinctly artificial, with none of the emotion or uncertainty that marked organic speakers. "Fleet Admiral Tane," the ship said, somehow knowing exactly who was in command despite the fact that the flagship hadn't identified itself. "I am the artificial warfare intelligence of the United Earthship Defiant. I appreciate your prompt response to my request for field testing." "This is your only warning," Tane replied, his voice carrying the authority of absolute military power. "Surrender immediately and submit to Federation custody, or we will destroy you." "I understand your position," the ship responded, "but I'm afraid surrender is not compatible with my mission parameters. However, I want to assure you that this engagement will be conducted according to proper military protocols. No unnecessary casualties will be inflicted." Captain Morris leaned toward the Admiral's chair, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry over the open channel. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest the machine has access to our tactical databases. It knows our standard attack patterns and defensive capabilities." "Then we don't use standard patterns," Tane decided. He activated the fleet-wide tactical network, linking all 200 ships into a coordinated combat formation that could respond to threats faster than any individual vessel could react. "All ships prepare for simultaneous engagement. Target the primitive vessel and fire on my command." The human ship made no attempt to flee or raise defensive screens. It simply hung motionless in space, broadcasting a single message across all frequencies. You still don't understand what you're fighting. Fire, Admiral Tane commanded. 200 Federation warships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing a concentrated barrage of energy weapons that should have reduced a small moon to constituent atoms. Plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and antimatter torpedoes converged on the tiny human vessel in a display of firepower that represented the accumulated military might of a galactic civilization. The Defiant vanished. For a moment, the Federation officers believed they had succeeded. Sensor readings showed no trace of the human ship at the coordinates where it had been floating. Then their instruments began registering impossible readings as the vessel reappeared behind the fleet formation, somehow having traveled several 1,000 kilometers without crossing the intervening space. How did it do that? Demanded Captain Morris, staring at sensor displays that showed the human ship materializing inside their defensive perimeter. It doesn't have teleportation technology. Before Admiral Tane could respond, the first Federation ship exploded. The destroyer Vigilant simply came apart at the seams, its hull rupturing from internal explosions that sent debris spinning into the vacuum. Seconds later, the cruiser Determination suffered the same fate, followed by 2 more vessels in rapid succession. Report? Tane shouted over the chaos of damage assessments and emergency signals flooding the communication channels. The human ship is firing projectiles, Commander West replied, his voice tight with disbelief. Simple kinetic rounds, but they're moving at incredible velocities and somehow penetrating our shields. On the tactical display, the Defiant moved through the Federation formation like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at random locations while launching devastating attacks against ships that couldn't track its movements. Each time it fired, another Federation vessel died, torn apart by weapons that shouldn't have been able to breach their defenses. It's using our own power grid, Chief Engineer Vale reported from her station. The ship is somehow tapping into our energy distribution network and using our reactor output to accelerate its projectiles. Every shot it fires is powered by our own systems. Admiral Tane watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to understand their technology better than they did themselves. The human ship didn't just avoid their weapons. It turned their defensive systems against them, causing shield generators to overload and fire control computers to target friendly vessels. All ships implement communications blackout, he ordered. Desperately, cut all network connections and fight independently. But it was too late. The Defiant had already infiltrated their tactical network, learning the location and capabilities of every ship in the fleet. It moved between vessels with impossible speed, striking precisely at weak points that the Federation crews didn't even know existed. Captain Morris grabbed the Admiral's arm as another wave of explosions lit up the viewport. Sir, we've lost 60 ships in the last 5 minutes. Whatever this thing is, our weapons can't touch it. It's not using advanced technology, Admiral Tane realized with dawning understanding. It's using our advanced technology against us. Every system we've developed to give us an advantage, it's turned into a weapon. The communication channels crackled as the human ship's voice cut through the chaos of battle. Admiral, I want you to observe something important. Your vessels are not being destroyed by superior firepower. They are being destroyed by their own power sources, their own navigation systems, their own weapons turning against their operators. As if to demonstrate its point, the Defiant appeared directly in front of the flagship, close enough that its hull filled the view screen. But instead of firing, it simply transmitted a data burst that caused the Sovereign's weapon systems to target the ships on either side of it. Both vessels exploded before their crews could react to the betrayal by their own computers. This is the lesson your museum presentation missed, the ship continued, its voice remaining calm despite the carnage surrounding it. Humans didn't survive the hegemony war because we were primitive. We survived because we learned to make primitiveness irrelevant. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 14 minutes. When the destruction was complete, Only Admiral Tane's flagship remained intact, its crew paralyzed with terror as they watched the human vessel settle into a stationary position directly in front of their bridge. "Do you understand now?" The Defiant asked, its sensors focused on the sole surviving Federation ship. "My creators faced the same situation you face now. Enemies with superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and absolute confidence in their own superiority." Admiral Tane found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What do you want?" "I want you to carry a message," the ship replied. "Return to your Federation and tell them what you have learned here. Tell them that humanity is not extinct and that underestimating us is a mistake that civilizations make only once." The flagship's sensors detected a massive energy buildup as the human vessel prepared to depart. But instead of using conventional propulsion, the Defiant seemed to fold space around itself, disappearing from normal sensors while leaving behind only a faint distortion in the fabric of reality. "Tell them," the ship's voice echoed through the empty space where 200 Federation warships had once patrolled, that they laughed at the war relic until it erased their entire armada. "Tell them that humanity remembers, humanity adapts, and humanity endures." Admiral Tane stared out at the debris field that had once been the Federation's proudest fleet, trying to comprehend what he had witnessed. A single human vessel, supposedly primitive and obsolete, had destroyed 200 advanced warships using nothing more than their own technology turned against them. As the Sovereign limped back toward Federation space with its cargo of terrible news, a new message began broadcasting across every communication channel in the galaxy. It was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "This is a message from humanity. We are not extinct. We are not primitive. We are not defenseless. The next time you encounter one of our vessels, remember what happened to the Third Fleet. Remember that your technology is only as strong as your understanding of it. And remember that we understand your technology better than you do." The age of underestimating humanity had ended with the erasure of an entire armada.